So I've got a mimic something that I built for a customer here in the past, which is about compliance reviews. And the lay of the land is we want to allow customer self-service through a portal that they can submit compliance cases for review. And what they're allowed to do with those cases is going to differ depending on the life cycle of that review. So for example, when something's reviewed, in fact, I might as well show you this on the portal, just get signed in. So unlike my Spotify clone, this is completely unstyled, and I did something really stupid. Hands up. I thought I'd build this out today. So I was going to present Sunday. There's something got reshuffled. So where I was going to have the weekend to build it, I had this morning to build it. So what I'm talking about is this kind of thing. Of all my compliance cases, what am I allowed to do with each based on its status reason? So if you imagine, some of these things have already gone through the compliance process. So those that are already passed or failed, imagine, think back to a resolved case in Dynamics. There's only certain things you would allow a customer to do with that. You wouldn't want them to reopen it. You wouldn't want them to change the feedback that you've provided. In this case, I certainly wouldn't want a customer to be able to change their own compliance grade for that. So one of my lessons learned is, as I said, building in those status reasons, but tying that to the actions that I allow. So when we configure a list, we can choose which actions are allowed for each item in that list. But taking that to the next level, which I'll show you shortly, is we can tie which actions relate to which status reasons. So for example, something that's draft that's just entered the process, I can view it, I can update it. So perhaps if I've made a few mistakes, I can go back in, make some changes to that, or I could delete it altogether so it never enters the workflow. It never lands in anyone's dashboard. No one begins to review that. And another top tip there, of the status reasons, I always, for anything that's going to be portal facing, create a draft status reason. The idea being that people can come back in and make changes to that. So if I've not been a very nice portal designer and I've not said, before you begin this process, make sure you've got your paperwork to hand, your national insurance number, social security number, or whatever it's going to take to get through this process, I at least need to give them a chance to exit and come back to it later. And that's what I use the draft status reason for. So I could come in here, update that. Whatever change it is that I want to make, my very detailed summary of advice. And then my next tip with status reasons is to set them when you save a form. So something quite subtle happened there that you may or may not have noticed, but that changed from draft to submitted. So we'll see that later on when we come to metadata. A way that we can level up our forms is that we can have certain fields set when we submit a form. So that can be when we pass to the next stage, or it could be once we complete an entire process, so once we get to the end of a web form, perhaps. So let's see this one in progress, and then we're going to build out a bit more functionality on this. So I'm very intentionally sticking to forms and lists on my portal, because really that's the bread and butter. That's the stuff that I wish I'd conquered and really mastered in detail before I got into more advanced work with the portal. So I'm going to submit a compliance case. I could have used the create button. I've got it up here in my web link set. So everything that you see on screen, if you're new to portals, is entirely out of the box. So I've created a form in Dataverse or within Dynamics 365. And I've essentially put a wrapper around that to say, I want to make this available on the portal. So if you've ever custom coded forms, I'm not having to do things like write basic validation, like set data types, like set defaults. I'm not having to build custom controls. Everything's already here, ready to go with Bootstrap. Bootstrap and jQuery UI is what's used for this. But all you have to do is build a form in the back end and put a wrapper around that, which I'll show you shortly. Okay, so saying who's delivered this advice, when was it, and a very detailed summary of the advice that was given. So when I click next, what's happening on my advanced form, again, just for those that are new to Power Apps portals, is that record's already created in Dynamics on my model-driven app. So that can become really useful if, for example, you get a call from a customer, they're stuck halfway through, they're maybe not sure what a question means or they haven't got the right information. I can fire up Dynamics on my model-driven app and see exactly what they see, even before they get to the end of the process. What I've got now is a many-to-many relationship. So I want to list how many products, which were sold and which were discussed as part of this financial advice case. So I thought I'd go for something about as far from the Spotify clone as I possibly could. Okay, so we can repeat that for as many products as were discussed in this particular piece of financial advice. And all of this really goes into my thought process at the start of a portal project. So what is it that we need to capture and what is it that the customer needs to be able to do? So for example, if I realize I've selected the wrong product there, unless I've planned this into the project and I've configured it, I wouldn't have the option, for example, to edit that product and say, in fact, it's not a commercial remortgage that I'm interested in, or sorry, that they're interested in, it's a commercial mortgage. Or likewise, I can remove from there. So all of this is elements that I've configured through the portal management app. Okay, and I've got control over just about everything there. So if I wanted to change that text, for example, the record has been deleted with something more meaningful, like you've successfully removed the product from your compliance case, again, completely in my control. Then given the ability to attach files as part of that review. So anyone that knows the financial advice world, that might be things like suitability letters, that might be ID documents, things that we look at as part of due diligence, or in this case, completely random notes from a meeting that I had locally. And then again, another lesson learned really is at the end of the process, I'm giving people the chance to review and submit. Review before they submit. So here's the information you've provided so far. Check over it, make sure you're happy with that. And while I'm saying that, that's actually prompting another tip. We'll go back and add some instructions for that, just in case looking at this screen isn't particularly clear. We can add some instructions specific to each step quite easily that will just let people know why we're showing this information and what we expect of them. So if I perhaps get to the end and realize that in fact there was another product, so I didn't mean to delete that before. I've got building in as much flexibility as possible, and perhaps there's another attachment And then on submit, I'm capturing a couple of things, which again, I'd say would fall into my lessons learned. Which are, I've captured behind the scenes the date that was submitted. So perhaps I'm interested in my stats when the record was created versus when it was submitted, when it was scored, and when it was finally resolved. So I'm using metadata for my advanced form there to say, automatically set that date submitted, automatically set the status reason to submitted, as opposed to draft. And I set draft when I'm configuring my status reasons in Dynamics or my model-driven app to be the default. So let's see how some of that hangs together. So that multi-step process that I've shown so far, that's an advanced form. So anyone, again, new to Power Apps portals, we've got two types of form. We've got a basic form, which used to be known as an entity form, and we've got an advanced form. Basic forms usually are good for if it's quite a straightforward process and there are no child records associated with that. So in my example, I had the case and then the many products that might relate to that case. If you think back to creating that in Dynamics, I can't do anything with that product subgrid until the record exists. So that's one big benefit of using the advanced forms, because you can have a combination of create and update steps. And in fact, there's more to it than that. There can be create, update, conditions. They can be from various different entities, but as a starting point, that's why I've thought advanced form rather than basic form. So let's see what's going on as part of my advanced form. So I've got various different steps. I'm first creating a record, which is with this insert step. So as I mentioned, every time I hit next, my progress is saved to Dynamics. So on that first stage, I already had a partially completed compliance record in my model-driven app, and every other step is expanding on that, which is why they are edit steps. So some of my top tips really, I never would have thought of unless I had a client requirement for that. We're probably all used to where you get a requirement completely out of left field. Sometimes it's not even stated as a requirement. It's just, oh, how can I see this? So in this example, what it was is, how can I see who edited each of that? So we've got permissions that anyone at that financial advice company can create cases. Principals can edit on other people's behalf. And we wanted something like the out of the box fields where we can see who created the record, who modified the record. It's not something you get out of the box, but it's quite easy to configure. So again, that's gone into my design of my Power App, that on compliance case. I've created a couple of fields. I've got which portal user that was created by. So that's a lookup to the contact table. And likewise, which portal user the record was modified by. So that's just somewhere to store it. That doesn't capture the information. That's going to be part of my config within the portal management app. So what I've got is apologies, I always forget where this is. That's what I'm looking for. So associate the current portal user on insert. So in fact, even though it says insert, it will be on completion of that step, not just necessarily on creation of a record. So what I'm saying there is that I want to set a lookup field on the record that's being created or updated with the current portal user. And again, just in case you're new to Power Apps portals, and apologies, I'm sure it's really annoying if you're not, me keep saying that, but the security model is based on accounts and contacts for the portal. So another top tip there that you've got to consider that in when you're designing your entities, your data model, that you need to have relationships to accounts or contacts. And what you're actually using to log into the portal, a portal user is how it's worded, but it's actually a contact. So what I'm saying there is I want to set that contact in the lookup field that I've called created by portal user. And where I would see that back in my model driven app, is I've set that created by is the portal user. And what I could do is repeat that for each of the subsequent steps to say who's modified that record. That again is not a user, so it wouldn't work in these out of the box fields, but that's a lookup to the contact instead. So looking at the makeup of this web form, we've got multiple different steps. So within each, I'm saying what is the next step, but also what do I want to show? So which form is it that I'm presenting on the portal? This is what I was calling that wrapper to make something available on the portal. I've had to set permissions, and then I've got a series of config tasks. Which forms do I want to show? Which lists do I want to show? And I'm wiring them up together. Again, something we'll see in today's session. So I can, for example, show all of a form, or if I select a tab as well, then it'll show only that particular tab of that form. So usually take that into account as well when I'm designing my forms. I'll think about how it's worth breaking that down on the portal. So some of that is what makes sense in kind of logical groupings. And another is maybe what chances do I want to give the end user, the portal contact, a chance to gather the thoughts, to save the progress before they get to the end of a mammoth form. So in this case, they can go through everything on the general tab, separately on the products tab, separately on the attachments, and that's how we'll work with that one. Hope that's all clear so far. Do shout up if not.
Nope, that's great. Thank you. Well, it is for me anyway.
So I've, at the form level, I've said I want to show a progress bar. So you might have noticed that when I was clicking through that creation form, that I've got these bootstrap tabs across the top of my form. That's, again, just a tiny little bit of config. Yes, I want to show a progress bar. Which type? So there's various different types. Where do I want to show it? And do I want to include a number in that? That's quite an interesting one. Do we want to show the last step in the progress count? Oh, sorry, do we want to ignore the last step in the progress count? I usually do. And then on the last step, I've got, sorry, the last kind of useful area to take a look, and it is quite easily missed, is the metadata for that web form step. So that's where I could do things like kind of the equivalent to business rules. So business rules that you set up in your model-driven app or Dataverse, they don't exist. Sorry, they don't apply in the portal. So things like conditionally showing and hiding fields, making fields mandatory in certain scenarios, that doesn't come across to the portal. So metadata is kind of your halfway house for that. So in fact, I'll show you that on a different web form step where I'm using it quite heavily. So I'm going to go back to the main form, look at my web form steps. And the review and submit stage, I mentioned there's quite a bit going on there. So in my metadata, as you can see, it's nothing but just records in Dynamics, nice easy config. So I want to set when that particular record was submitted. I mentioned I got today's date in there. This is how that happens. So I've got it when this form submits, this metadata takes place. So there are various types. This is attribute. It's a field that I want to set. I can choose them with their user-friendly names here in the drop-down, but I can see date submitted is already selected. And what I'm interested in this case is setting its value on save. So when somebody gets to the end of that form, submits it, I want to set the date submitted field to today's date. I've got options for other things in there. Say I want to pre-populate a field as well as just setting it. So if I was bothered about showing it on screen, or I just want to set a useful default, maybe I could do that here. I can also change the style of things as well. This is quite popular if you've not seen it before, and that's for things like if you think the lookup control is a bit too complicated for someone that's never used Dynamics or a portal before, that you can show that as just a drop-down list instead. All kind of useful things there. Code component, quite an exciting new addition there. Way above my head, but what I've seen other people do with it is fantastic. So that's one example. Another, as I said, that I use on almost every process-driven project, which for self-service, they're all really, for me, process-driven, is setting a status reason once you pass a certain stage. So in this case, when you're submitting a form, I want to set the field of status reason to a particular value. So you do have to know the numeric value in this example that's submitted. So all the way through that process, it's draft and you're allowed to make certain changes. But when you get to the end and you've submitted, then a number of those permissible actions go away. So you can't, for example, edit it anymore once it's submitted. Notes is what allows me to add that control and showing any attachments that are already on that, and I can control, as you see here, whether users are allowed to edit those, delete them, whether they're allowed to create new ones. And another really useful one, which you've seen in practice but probably not realized that there was what config that was required for it, is the subgrid. So when I went to just have a look at my cases. So what I'm doing with that subgrid metadata is I'm controlling what can be done with this subgrid. So in this case, I've specified nothing. So the user can see everything that's in the subgrid, which is a nice time saver for me as someone building a website, that I can show those child records nice and easily, just include it on the form in Dynamics model driven app, and it's automatically shown on the portal. But if I want to allow edit, delete, deactivate, etc., I've got the options to do that with my metadata. So here's an example where I've got that. So that first step, as we said, creates a record in Dynamics. Now I can attach records to that. So quickly set one up so I can show you the actions that I'm talking about. So this metadata is what allows me, for example, to include that add a product button. and to enable, edit, remove, whatever else I choose about that. It could be enabling an on-demand workflow, deactivating, creating child records, all kinds of good stuff. But it's just a matter of coming to my advanced form metadata, and I'm saying what I want to configure is a subgrid, very imaginatively named by me in the back end. But here it is, here's what we're talking about. This grid configuration, that's where I've specified, do I want to allow a create option? Do I want to allow a download option, associate? And what should each of those things do? So in this example, I was just using a basic form, which is what I saw in the pop-up there. I could also point to a different web page, a different URL, if I had something more custom going on there. Likewise, to edit the product, I can choose what I want to take place there. So which form do I want to open, or which web pages in, that would give me a lookup to select a web page within my portal, whereas the URL would be potentially something external. But you see all kinds of other things going on. It's up to you what you choose to allow the users to do. So how much do you want to open this self-service scenario? And this is per form, so you're not committed, for example, because you've chosen to allow them to create an update in one scenario, that's always how it's going to be. You could allow creating one situation, updating another, deleting another, or just always view. You've got complete control over that. Okay, I'll not take you through the pain of seeing that again. I'm going to return to my cases. As we probably expected, that's draft because I've not got to the end of the process. So again, thinking ahead, setting a default status reason, and then setting the others accordingly through different stages of the process. So what I'd like to take a look at next is really what I would consider taking my lists to the next level. So if you imagine hundreds of these cases coming every month, thousands perhaps, and especially if I'm looking at as a principal or a manager where I get to see everybody's cases rather than just my own, I want to provide some useful filtering options. So my lesson learned here was always at the start of a portal project, I'd end up very quickly with something like 10 different screens that you would go to just to see cases that are in different statuses, for example. So I'd have one link in the navigation bar to say, right, here's your draft, here's your in progress, here's your submitted, your deleted, draft, etc. Sorry, not deleted, but cancelled. And it soon really takes over the end user and makes for a pretty poor experience. So this tip would be coming to my lists. And this now I've just got in the hang of doing on every single project. So if we've got a list, I'm going to apply these steps. So the first one that I want to input is, again, thinking if there are tens, hundreds, thousands in this list, I want to enable search. Search is really easy to set up within these lists, and it's going to use the quick find view. So everyone that's used to configuring Dynamics and model-driven apps, what I really like about that is you're leveraging your existing skills. And what I'll show you shortly as well is Advanced Find and Fetch XML Builder are your friend as well. So for search, simple matter of coming down to finding the option, tick a checkbox. My list is already searchable. So for show you that, I'm going to clear the cache. So pull down the latest config, the latest changes, and then refresh the portal. And I can now search that list. So it's very much how search works in Dynamics. And I say it's based on that quick find view, which leads me to another tip, which is I'll almost always put a customer facing reference number, a unique ID other than the GUID. So I wouldn't expect a user to remember what their GUID was, or even attempt to type in that 36 character unique ID, whereas I would perhaps say let people look for 212409. So that's a useful starting point if they know the piece of information they're looking for. So I know a particular reference number I want to jump to. Maybe I know a particular customer's name that I want to search. So I already got some helpful starting points there. But again, going back to that idea where I've got maybe tens, hundreds, thousands of cases in the list, I'd rather like to filter as well. I'd like to filter, and I as a customer would like some self-service reporting options. So you can go to the nth degree and include Power BI, but if you're looking for something quick and dirty, yes, customer, we can give you that in Excel format if that's any help, and you can have it within a second or two's worth of config. I'm going to go to options in my grid configuration and say I want to allow downloads. So it's not particularly configurable, this. Sorry, not my environment keeps coming up with that error, but it does actually save. So what that's going to allow me to do is just offer a download of that information in an Excel file. So I can't brand it or anything like that, but again, if we're just talking quick and dirty, maybe this is just for the prototyping phase. There we go, kicked off a download in Excel format. So nothing pretty, but on a lot of these projects where I'm replacing a legacy system, that on its own would have, been enough for customers to rave about just the simple fact they've never been able to do that, and now it's one click away. And for me, it was a matter of about 3 clicks in total. So next step, I'm going to apply some metadata filters. So what this is going to allow me to do, again, thinking I've got that super long list, is maybe say pick out certain date ranges, filter by customer name, filter by advisor name, filter by different statuses. So on this main tab, on general, I'm going to come to metadata filter. Yes, I want to enable it. Do I want it horizontally above the list, or do I want it vertically to the side of the list? Pardon me, I'm going to apply a label for what I want to say on the button, and then it's up to me what I want to choose about these. So I'm going to go for a range first of all. So this is going to be for my for the date the advice was given. So I can choose from the list that's on that entity. Various options. I'm going to go for checkboxes. And let's say, for example, you can, this is very much like building an advanced find. So perhaps I want to show those that are in the last X days. I'll give them some pre-filled options, like you can choose the last 7 days, the last 30 days, and the last 90 days. And then perhaps I want to show, I give the option to filter by different status reasons. So I'm going to go for an attribute filter set. And you see it automatically picks for me, here are all my status reasons as a starting point. I could choose to filter some of those out. So let's say for whatever reason, I don't want to show cancelled in that list. And In fact, I'll leave it as that. All the others are active status reasons. I'm going to leave it at that, and let's go for a dynamic pick list. So of the grades, in fact, no, I'm not going to do that one. So the difference is this one, choosing a dynamic pick list would be looking through the list and only showing the ones that appear in any of the data. I'm just going to go for an attribute filter again. So the difference here, will always show each of those A, B, C, D, and E, even if none of those are present in the data. And perhaps go for a dynamic lookup. So this one, as the name suggests, this is going to cover fields of type lookup. And in fact, no, so let's just keep an eye on the time, continue through that. So save what I've done, refresh the cache, and then I've got a much more functional list. So in my early days configuring portals, I say that this same functionality either would have been custom built or in something like JavaScript, or would have required 5-10 different screens. For example, here's my recent cases, here are my submitted ones, here are my failed ones, here are those of a certain grade, whereas now I can just say, for example, show me everything that's submitted, show me everything that's been submitted in the last 30 days. And again, from an end user's perspective, certainly nothing fancy. I've done nothing to style this yet, but I'm adding lots of value. And I've thought about it really from the perspective of how would I be interacting with those records in Dynamics? I'd be searching, I'd be using advanced find, I'd be filtering my views. So I want to provide those same options for my end users. So something that I'd usually do as well when it gets to customizing and styling is I would probably wrap that with some JavaScript to expand or collapse it out of the way. But so for starting points, if you think we want to show something within, say, 3 hours of spinning up a portal, we want to show how this can work as a functional web app with virtually no time spent. Here we've got that. So probably the next useful thing to see is I mentioned about filtering these available actions. So this is something that I definitely 100% overworked the first time, built it in JavaScript, manipulating the DOM and stuff before I realized that you can actually do it out of the box just with config. In my defense, I'm going to show you how I missed that. So back on my list, in the options area, I've got the grid config where we came to moments ago to add that download button. So I've already been in to say I want to allow the create option. So it's in two different categories here. One is for the view overall, and the other relates to each item, so each record within that list. So you see the create and download appear above the list, and then the options that I'm talking about now are going to apply to the rows within that. So this is what you see by default. You can add details, which is a view option. So for example, I want to see a record, edit, I want to amend a record, delete it, etc. But you can have, for this details view where you're viewing a record, you can have multiple different views. So you might choose in this example, I've got a simpler version of the form, which I'm using for before it's been reviewed and it's got any feedback on it, and a more detailed version of the form. So this one would include things like the grade, the feedback, etc. I've got the option to go in and edit the case. I'm allowing people to delete, and I'm allowing people to run a workflow to cancel their case. And so we've got some security measures in place where we only allow people to perform certain actions at certain statuses. So for example, it wouldn't be very kosher to say, right, you've got a grade E, your advice is terrible, but feel free to just delete it rather than do anything about it. So I'm going to restrict that to say, for example, you can only delete while it's at the draft stage. You can only cancel before we've received that, so before it's in progress. And the basic view, perhaps that's only relevant up until it's been reviewed. So couldn't see any options here. Kind of like you do sometimes, perhaps just take it on the chin and think, well, that's the extent of the config, and we'll just get our hands dirty with JavaScript. That's usually how it goes on Portal projects. But what the one that I was saying I thought quite easy to miss is if you tick this checkbox to show the advanced settings. First of all, you get a few different labels and options you can set. So for example, on my workflow, I've got options like I can specify, do you have to confirm before you cancel? What text do we want to show in that? For delete, perhaps I want to change the label to say remove, and instead of records been deleted, your case has been removed from the queue, or something that I think is more customer friendly. But the bit I'm interested in is this filter criteria. So what I've done in there, I've done an advanced find to capture the status reasons that I'm interested in. So that's telling me only if the status reason is draft do we want to show the delete button. So quickly show you how to prepare that. Very straightforward. So I'm saying only if it's draft, but all the usual filters you've got. It doesn't necessarily have to be status reason. It's just that's the one that I tend to tie my design to. So the permissible actions, are dependent on the status reason, but they could be on just about anything you can create with Advanced Find. So I'm going to download that fetch XML. It's pretty much usable as is. I've just got a few tweaks to make, and that's that I need to get rid of the attributes and the sort order. The reason being that that comes from the list itself. I would lift that and paste it into my filter criteria. So you can see I've been in and done that for any of them that I want to be conditional. So for example, with the cancel, you can only do that if it's I believe it's submitted or in progress, but you can't do it later than that. So the end result of that, just as a reminder, is that these are the actions that I can do at the submitted stage. This is what I can do once it's in progress. So the idea is, so it's draft. Pardon me, when it's draft, I can do anything I want with it. Once it's submitted, I can cancel it, I can view it, but I can't edit it. Once it's in progress, in my concept really, the idea is that is then assigned to somebody. It's coming through the workflow, they've set it to in progress, and then it's very much locked down until it's either been reviewed and passed, at which stage all I can do is view it, which again comes into my design that I need a read-only form. So that I can set on the basic forms or the advanced forms to say whether it's insert, read-only, or edit. And I tend to use a combination of those and have at least one of each for each table for the processes I'm bringing online. Not that time, unfortunately, to go over it in detail, but just a heads up, you've got similar things, similar options that we've got here with lists, but on our forms. And you, of course, can't see my hand gestures, which will probably help me concentrate a bit. You got the chance to add JavaScript as well, which is quite helpful. So that can bridge the gap where, as I said, business rules don't apply on the portal. There's nowhere particularly to do conditional showing and hiding, whereas JavaScript will allow you to do that. You can, as part of your web form steps, relate records. So let's say you got one web form step that creates a contact, the next one creates an account, and you want to relate the two together, maybe setting the primary contact or setting the company name field on the contact record. That's where this can come in handy. But this is the bit that I was talking about, that you've got configurable options here as well, like you would with the list, that you can provide users access to on-demand workflows, that you can, assuming you give them the right permissions, that you can delete records, that you can create related records, that you could activate, that you could deactivate. So all of that is from a list, but likewise, I could provide the same options here within the form. So from here, I could give the users the chance to run a workflow. So let's say maybe if that's a manager taking a look at someone else's case, maybe we put a button on there to run a workflow to chase them up. Or I, as I don't know, a senior of that advisor, Layla Musa, as my daughter, if I wanted to just give her a kind reminder to attach her files, or that such a scan of a document's missing, that's maybe things that I would build in with a workflow. It seemed quite scary, in all honesty, but when I first heard that we can give users the chance to trigger workflows on demand, but I've actually found quite a few good reasons for it. And in the real world, they are things like triggering reminders, and for giving them a controlled way to change the status of a record. So nowhere on this portal have I made on any portal have I made the status reason editable. That's all driven by process, or driven by my users in the back end rather than the portal. So if you imagine, it'd be quite easy to say, oh, I've got a B, I was really hoping for an A, I'm just going to change the status back to draft so it's editable, pop that back to a C, pop that to an A and change the status reason back. Not something we want to allow portal users to do, or usually not anyway. So our permissions, I'll try and squeeze this into like 30 seconds, but the permissions, we can set a by table. And this, again, it comes into that design that, quickly show you what I'm talking about. I'll choose this starter portal. So I'm saying which table I'm securing access to, what type of access. So it would usually be either contact, account, or parent. So contact or account is where the logged in portal user, either they or the account that they belong to, have got a relationship with it. So by relationship, we're talking a lookup field, a many-to-many relationship, that kind of thing. So we're saying which entity are we securing on which portal, what kind of relationship. So global would be you're allowed to see everything regardless of your relationship with it, which would maybe be for things like products in your catalogue. Whereas for this one, I'm saying that the contact has got to have a relationship with that case. So where they're the advisor in this example, through the customer field. Likewise, it could be account. So I've said in the other scenario that I'm allowed to see them for my account. So I'm either directly the advisor on it and I can create, read, write, delete, etc. I can do everything with it. Or if it's belonging to another contact at my account, then perhaps I'm allowed to read it, I'm allowed to append to it, so maybe add some notes, but nothing else. And then the child records, that sends that, for example, a note wouldn't have a direct relationship with a contact or an account, but by virtue of the fact that this permission, that record is a child of something that I've granted access to, I'll allow them to use it that way. Okay, sorry, slightly over the 50 minutes. Pop back to the chat. Have we got any questions?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of questions. First off, I just want to say I've been practicing this, right? Grazie mille. Is that okay? Grazie mille. Yeah. I thought that was amazing. Thank you very much. And my first thought was, if only I could get my kids to do things with workflows, right? I would really like you to teach me how that works. But yes, we do have some questions. The first one was from Udaya, and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name quite right, Udaya, who asks, is it possible to show public shared OneDrive documents or SharePoint library documents as table with downloadable or viewable in Power Portal?
I would say yes. So the answer is yes, there is native SharePoint integration for the portals. It's not something that's come up as a requirement on any of my projects, but I'll quickly show you that's where to get started with that. So if you go to make.powerapps.com, and then within your list of apps, go to the portal. So I use this trial environment for all sorts, but within settings and admin, oh, sorry, that's not the portal, that's the backend. Then I believe portal actions. No, apologies, I think it's moved since, unless I'm missing some. Oh, sorry, there it is. Set up SharePoint integration. Yeah, so that's your starting point. It's worth reading up on. So I thought it's at least worth answering that. Yes, it's possible.
Okay, lovely. And another question from Udaya. Once you've configured the Google provider for portals, how do you allow specific Google accounts to view specific pages after logging in? Normally, it only allows Google accounts.
So I assume that we're talking about external identity providers. So at the heart of that, they would still be a contact, and it is about those entity permissions that you've set up. So it would be saying that, for example, I'm not sure what entity it is you're talking about, but let's say, I don't know, it's for the same thing, compliance. I do it the same way that I'd say, right, when somebody logs in, regardless of whether it's from Google or not, that's how I'm setting the permission. I'm allowing them to see the records for whichever table I'm interested in, specifically whether they have a contact relationship with it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
I didn't get to mention, didn't really come up during that demo, is web roles. So that's somewhere where you can layer the security as well. So perhaps when I mentioned about maybe managers, principals can have different levels of permissions, it's this that lets you control that. When hide pages based on web roles, and you can set the permissions differently for web roles. So if anyone saw my Spotify clone example, I had different permissions, for example, for listeners versus record label admin versus Spotify, Songify staff. They're each allowed to do different things. So as a listener, I can edit playlists, for example, but I can't edit songs. As record label admin, I can edit artists, but other people can't.
Okay, so another couple of questions. How could we filter a referenced entity?
That I would say do with, depends where it is you're looking to filter it, but one was, one option is with JavaScript. So you'd perhaps do a query with Liquid to show which records it is that you're trying to display in which scenario, and then you'd use JavaScript to apply that filter. Nicholas Haydock, I'm quite sure, has done a really good article on that, as he has on just about everything portals.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And thanks to Vladimir for that question. We've got a question from Max, which is, how can we display images for products?
I'd probably say the best way to answer the question in time is if you pop over to my website and let's see, is the one for it. I've done something regarding images. I can't remember whether that was only with the Portal Web API or it was. So what I'd suggest, take a look at, I'd use Liquid as the first answer. So if you look up my session from the Scottish Summit, that I'm quite sure I'll go over the Liquid for retrieving images on that. But what I tend to do is attach it as a note, so I could show you that in the Model Driven app. So what I struggled with until came up with this way of working is that the images data type isn't visible. It's not available to the portal. So what I've done is I set up a workflow that every time I create a record of a particular type, in this case it's track, that I get two note attachments, one called artwork, one called audio. So I would be using fetch XML to say retrieve the note attachment called artwork for this particular record. So you usually have that in your URL for the portal to open that particular track. We'd say then do a query, find that image, output it using fetch XML and Liquid. That's a very quick overview, but just in more detail then.
Thank you. We're actually, I think we're about out of time, right? We do have a couple more questions in the chat. So if you could, if it's okay for you to share your contact details in the chat, and then perhaps attendees could contact you directly with any further questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, by all means. Sorry, I just noticed a few people had mentioned Shopify. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Do check out, if you're interested in Liquid, my session from Scottish Summit, because that'll go over some of the biggest additions that you get with Power Apps portals that don't exist as part of Shopify Liquid, but do in Power Apps portals. And they're mainly around that Dynamics integration. So how to retrieve records with Fetch XML, or how to retrieve a single record. Really powerful stuff that you wouldn't pick up through Shopify. So in fact, that should have been a lesson learned as well. Thanks very much, everyone, and apologies.
Thank you. No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Franco, and thanks for a fantastic session.
You're most welcome. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you. See you soon. Bye. So, everyone, thank you very much.